Welcome to Executive Insights for Life Sciences Innovators, and thank you for joining us. On this podcast, we'll explore leadership, innovation, and growth in the life sciences sector. I'm Don Alexander, founder of GeneCoda, a boutique executive search firm dedicated to connecting visionary leaders with life sciences companies, shaping the future of therapeutics and scientific tools. On each episode, we'll dive into candid conversations with industry pioneers, uncovering insights, strategies, and real-world experiences that drive success in our industry. If you're interested in presenting as a guest of a future episode, please scan the barcode image at the top of my video frame and follow the instructions. Now I'm pleased to be joined by Pawel Krysiak, the President and CEO of Jaya Biosciences. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Paul is a life sciences executive with more than 20 years of experience across neurodegeneration, oncology, and rare diseases. Throughout his career, he's contributed to the commercialization and market access of multiple orphan drugs, including Cerezyme, Fabrazyme, Soliris, and many others. His work has also included the discovery of novel oncology targets and the development of emerging therapies for genetically defined diseases. Prior to Jaya Biosciences, his experiences included president and CEO of M6P Therapeutics, president and CEO of Siva Therapeutics, VP of Sales and Business Development at Impyramed, VP of Commercial and Operations at Seardis Corporation, General Manager and Area Director at BioMarin, as well as roles of progressively increasing responsibilities in sales, marketing, and commercial strategy at Genzyme. Paul attained his Bachelor's of Science with specialized honors in biomedical sciences and biochemistry from the University of Guelph, and a Master's of Science in molecular physiology from Western University in Canada. He also earned his MBA and graduate certificate in healthcare leadership from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University, where he is also recognized as a Kellogg Executive Scholar in Nonprofit Management. In addition, he holds certificates in executive healthcare leadership and healthcare change management from Cornell. When not running Jaya Biosciences, Paul enjoys physical activities such as cycling, mountain biking, and weightlifting, as well as exploring local farms and farmers markets. So that's the whole deal, the real package. Paul, I appreciate again you joining us today.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for this kind
Let's talk a little
introduction.
bit about your career journey to get started. You spent much of your career across rare diseases, neurodegeneration, oncology, commercialization, and emerging therapeutics. What experiences most shaped your path in leading Jaya Biosciences?
Yes, that's a good question, Don. As you pointed out, much of my career has been actually shaped by the rare disease field. There, I learned that when you understand the underlying biology and you can identify the right patient population, you can fundamentally change the development path for these patients with serious diseases. Early in my career at Genzyme and later in BioMarin and other companies, I saw how therapies for genetically defined or biologically well-characterized diseases can move from really complex science, almost scary science, to actually real patient impact. And that experience stayed with me. And in rare diseases, you also get to interact and see patients and patient families. And they always give you this look, are you one of those people working on a cure or working on a therapy that can help me and my family? And they have a lot of bravery in their eyes. It's a profound experience. It stayed with me too. And Jaya represents the natural continuation of this journey. When we are essentially taking a precision medicine mindset, one that worked quite well in rare diseases, but also oncology. And we're applying this to adult-onset neurodegeneration, including Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. And our motivation is very simple. This disease creates enormous human suffering and huge burden to the society in terms of the cost. And we need to find new ways to think about them and address them effectively.
Absolutely. No, that's great. Now, you've contributed to the commercialization and market access of multiple orphan drugs. How has that background influenced how you think about developing therapies for serious neurodegenerative disease?
Yes, it influenced me a great deal. In rare diseases, you learn that science alone is not enough. You need the right patient identification strategy, you need the right clinical development plan, the right biomarkers, correct endpoints. You also need access strategy, physician education, and you really need to exhibit long-term commitment to patients and families. And I believe that this experience is highly relevant to neurodegeneration. Alzheimer's disease, for example, is often discussed as one large disease category. But our evidence suggests that biologically it's almost certainly heterogeneous. If we can identify genetically or biologically defined patient subgroups, we may be able to design more rational therapies, better trials, and ultimately develop more meaningful treatment approaches. And so this commercialization and market access background also makes me think early about the full path from discovery to actually therapeutic delivery to the patient. Not just whether the therapy works scientifically, but whether it can be developed, can it be delivered, can it be reimbursed, and can be adopted in a real world scenario.
Absolutely. Begin with the end in mind. Um,
Yes.
let me ask you, what leadership lessons from larger biopharma environments translated well into early stage company building, and what's required, I guess, a different mindset?
That's another good question. And I actually started my career in big pharma at Merck before I transitioned to the biotech side of things. And I think that lessons that translate well are cross-functional thinking and respect for execution. In larger biopharma organizations, you see how many pieces must come together. You know, the science, the clinical development, the CMC, the regulatory strategy, commercial planning, finance, the actual organizational culture, and there may be different in different organizations. But the system view is actually very valuable in early stage company too. What is different at the early stage and what requires a different mindset is speed, flexibility, and prioritization. In an early stage company, we have limited resources. We cannot do everything at once. So we have to make clear choices. We have to stay focused on the very next value-driving milestone and build this credibility step by step. We also have to be able to be willing to do more work outside of our traditional roles or experiences. In an early stage company, you often wear many hats and work many hours. But this early stage leadership requires a combination of optimism and resilience. I think one needs to believe deeply in the mission, but also be honest about the risks, the unknowns, the barriers, there'll be barriers there, and the work required to move from promising science to a development-ready company. And I think you must be willing to do this work with faith, with skill, and with excellence. And lastly, but importantly, I think you need to know when to turn the page if things do not work out. And not every early stage company will. And you also have to be able to, at a certain point, protect yourself. So I guess those would be the lessons that I would share.
That's really great. All really sound lessons for sure. Let's dive into JayaBio's scientific area, if you will, scientific foundation. So the platform is built around the role of lysosomal enzyme gene heterozygosity and adult-onset neurodegeneration. For a broad, rather, life sciences audience, how would you explain the core insight behind the company?
Yeah, sure. The core insight is that the partial loss of function in certain lysosomal enzymes may increase the risk of adult-onset neurodegeneration. This is really the gist. And, lysosomes are essentially described as the recycling centers of the cell. Lysosomes help clear damaged proteins, cellular waste, and other materials that need to be degraded and recycled. And in neurodegenerative diseases, including Alzheimer's disease, impaired clearance and protein aggregation are actually major biological themes. And the autophagy lysosomal pathway has long been implicated in neurodegeneration. Now, historically, people who carried one defective copy of lysosomal enzyme gene were often considered healthy carriers. But our scientific foundation challenges this assumption. Our data suggests that in some individuals, partial lysosomal enzyme deficiency, so one correct copy of the gene, one mutated copy of the gene, may actually contribute to disease biology later in life, especially increasing the risk of Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. And that actually creates a new novel therapeutic opportunity. We can identify genetically defined patients and develop therapies designed to restore and support lysosomal function in the central nervous system.
Interesting. As I understand it, Paul, historically carriers of lysosomal enzyme gene defects were often viewed as unaffected throughout life. What changed scientifically, and why does that matter for diseases like Alzheimer's?
Yes, another good question, Don. What changes really is our ability to analyze large human genetic data sets. We didn't have this in the past. Now we do. And now we can integrate them with family histories, with brain proteomics and disease biology. And then we can test our hypotheses and relevant animal models. So that's been a very good and positive change. Regarding the historical view of carriers, you're right. The traditional view essentially came from classical recessive genetics. If you had two defective copies of lysosomal enzyme gene, you could develop a severe, or you would develop a severe pediatric lysosomal storage disorder, a majority of which, by the way, include profound neurodegenerative features. However, if you had one defective copy, you were generally considered an unaffected carrier. But biology is often more nuanced, and we evolve our understanding of things, not just in neurodegeneration generally. And we see now that in the brain, over decades of aging, a partial reduction of lysosomal function actually may matter a lot. It may not cause a childhood disease, but it may significantly increase the risk of adult-onset neurodegeneration, including Alzheimer's. And that matters a lot because it reframes Alzheimer's and related dementias as a potentially genetically stratifiable diseases where patient subgroups may be identified and treated based on the actual underlying biology.
That's great. As you say, JayaBio describes Alzheimer's as not one homogeneous disease, but potentially several genetically defined patient populations. How does that change the way we should think about precision medicine in neurodegeneration?
Yes, I believe it changes discussion actually quite fundamentally. For decades, Alzheimer's has been approached as a single disease, with therapies aimed at common downstream features such as amyloid plaques or tau pathology. And these are important features, but they may not explain why disease begins in every patient. And if Alzheimer's is biologically heterogeneous, then we should not expect one treatment to work equally well for everyone. And so precision medicine, asks a different question. What is driving disease in this patient or patient subgroup? In oncology and rare diseases, that mindset has been actually transformative in developing disease-modifying treatments. And we believe that neurodegeneration may need a similar evolution. And for Jaya, that means identifying patients with lysosomal enzyme gene heterozygosity and developing targeted therapies designed to address that upstream biology.
Excellent. Your lead therapy, Paul, JB111, is an experimental CNS-directed AAV9 mediated PPT1 gene therapy being developed for Alzheimer's disease associated with PPT1 haploinsufficiency. What makes this a compelling starting point for JayaBio's pipeline?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I mentioned before, you have to prioritize. You cannot do everything, and
Right.
that's sometimes the desire or temptation of platform companies to say, okay, let's go with 5 drugs. And as I mentioned before, at early stage companies, it's good to be focused, build the credibility step by step. And for us, JB111 is very compelling because, generally speaking, it brings several important elements: genetically defined patient population, clear biological hypotheses, strong preclinical proof of concept and rationale, and therapeutic approach designed to, we believe, address the actual underlying deficit. And it really allows us to test the central idea behind JayaBio, that correcting lysosomal enzyme deficits in genetically defined patients may positively impact the disease course. But more specifically, there is a strong scientific rationale as well. More specifically, PPT1 gene encodes a lysosomal enzyme that is responsible for removing fatty acyl chains from palmitoylated proteins. And this is highly relevant in Alzheimer's disease because several proteins involved in amyloid processing are actually palmitoylated. And that includes amyloid precursor protein, or APP itself. And furthermore, in our preclinical models, we showed that partial loss of PPT1 function shifted APP processing from normal cleavage to pro-amyloidogenic pathway. It also exacerbated plaque formation and dramatically reduced the animal lifespan. And we designed JB111 as a CNS-directed gene therapy to provide a functional copy of PPT1 gene and to supplement the enzymatic activity in the brain. And in our preclinical studies, a single administration of JB111 improved several disease-relevant measures, dramatically improved survival, dramatically reduced amyloid burden, and improved cognitive performance. So, of course, this still remains experimental and preclinical, but it provides an important proof of concept for the broader platform. And that's why for these reasons, we selected JB111 or PPT1 associated Alzheimer's as the first program.
That's great, Paul. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about translating the science into a development stage, development-ready company. Neurodegeneration has historically been one of the most difficult areas in drug development. What gives you conviction that a genetically defined approach may create a different development path?
Well, yes, again, real good question. And neurodegeneration is difficult for many reasons. The disease biology is typically quite complex. Diagnosis is often late. Progression can be slow. Patient populations can be silently heterogeneous, and sometimes delivery to the brain can be complicated. And what gives us conviction is the opportunity to reduce some of this heterogeneity and some of this unknown by enriching patient populations. If we can identify patients whose disease is linked to a specific genetic defect or biological mechanism, we can then create more focused development path. And this does not remove all the risk. It's still a challenging area, but it can make the biology, the patient selection, the biomarker selection, and the clinical strategy more rational. And this is exactly, what precision medicine has done in other fields. And for Jaya, our goal is really to move from the broad clinical labels toward genetically and biologically defined neurodegenerative disease subtypes. I think that these precision medicine principles will serve this field well.
That's great. Super. JayaBio's approach, Paul, targets upstream effector pathways rather than focusing only on downstream markers such as amyloid plaques or maybe tau tangles. How should we think about that distinction from a translational and clinical development perspective?
Yes. You mentioned amyloid and tau, and amyloid and tau are important, right? But there are downstream manifestations of the disease. And they tell us something about what is happening in the brain, but may not always tell us why the disease began in a given patient or a given patient groups. So our approach is to look upstream at lysosomal dysfunction. If impaired lysosomal function contributes to protein accumulation and cellular stress and neurodegeneration, then restoring lysosomal enzyme activity may address an earlier driver of disease biology or disease mechanism, as we call it. Okay? And so from translational perspective, this matters because it influences patient selection, it influences biomarkers, it also may give us insights on timing of the intervention and what we measure as we develop the therapies. And so we're not dismissing downstream markers. In fact, our therapy impacts these downstream markers in a positive way. But rather, we are asking whether upstream correction can change this trajectory that leads to these markers. So that's the paradigm shift. And that's our approach. Treating genetically defined disease biology, not just the late stage pathological consequences, if you will.
Absolutely. That's great, Paul. Appreciate that explanation. So the company recently received a U.S. patent covering methods for detecting, preventing, reversing, and treating neurological diseases linked to heterozygous mutations in lysosomal enzyme genes. How important is IP strategy when building an early stage platform company in an area that's this complex?
Well done. As you can imagine, IP strategy is important, extremely important, and especially for an early stage platform company. In a field like neurodegeneration, where development timelines are long and the science is complex, strong intellectual property actually helps create the foundation for investment, for partnerships, and for long-term product development. For us, the IP is important because it protects not only the individual therapeutic concepts, but also the broader approach of identifying patients with lysosomal enzyme gene haploinsufficiency and developing these targeted intervention for neurological disease associated with these defects. And one note about IP is that a good IP does not replace execution, right? You still need to execute, but it creates the sort of protected space that is needed for execution. Right? It allows a company to invest in difficult translational work, and it kind of gives investors comfort that at least IP path is de-risked, and it allows for investment to flow more easily. And I think it all creates a path to a clearer path for value creation.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. Now, you've also received patent or patent allowances rather in Japan, China, and Singapore. How do you think about global strategy and potential partnership opportunities at this stage of company development?
Yes, this is an excellent question. And neurodegenerative diseases are global diseases, right? Alzheimer's and related dementias affect patients and families and healthcare systems around the world. It's a huge burden on families and systems everywhere. Over 55 million suffer from Alzheimer's globally. And June is actually Alzheimer's Awareness Month. So from the beginning, we actually think of a global relevance. We do have to remain disciplined and focused in terms of our development strategy because as early stage company, you always have limited resources. But global IP protection allows us to preserve optionality for future development or for regional partnerships, for strategic collaborations, and for market access planning, right? And so Japan, China, Singapore, US, and other markets that are coming on board with our IP real estate, they all matter in different ways. But having this protection in the multiple jurisdictions strengthens our platform, de-risks the story, and it really enables conversation with the strategics, for future partnerships, a lot more credible when we have this IP. And so, at this stage, our priority is to build a strong scientific and translational foundation. But this global IP gives us strategic flexibility for development in various markets.
Absolutely. You've touched, Paul, on this to some degree, but Alzheimer's and related neurodegenerative diseases represent enormous scientific, clinical, and economic challenges. You've already stated some of the figures. Where do you see the field moving over the next several years?
Right. And so this is my opinion, right? But I see the field moving towards greater biological segmentation, towards greater biological precision. I think that Alzheimer's disease will be increasingly understood not as a one disease, not a one bucket of 7 million Americans or 55 million globally, but sort of as a collection of overlapping biological subtypes, potentially with distinct mechanisms of action for the disease. And we're already seeing advances in biomarkers and in imaging and genetics and molecular profiling. And I think these tools will continue to help identify patients, which are most likely benefit from interventions, and also will help guide and monitor clinical development. I also think the field will move earlier in the disease towards patients who can be identified before the irreversible damage has occurred. That's one of the lessons that we learn in rare diseases, right? That you want to be able to treat patients early enough before irreversible damage has occurred. And that's where genetics and biomarkers also become especially powerful. So the future of neurodegeneration will likely, I think, involve combination of these elements, combination of earlier diagnoses, better patient stratification, disease-modifying therapies, and more personalized approaches.
Absolutely. Yeah. With people like you, the future is bright. What types, Paul,
Thanks for your confidence.
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
better keep working hard.
Please keep working hard. There are a few of us probably on this call who haven't been impacted either directly or indirectly through family members or friends. What types of partners or investors, collaborators are most important for advancing a CNS-directed gene therapy platform from preclinical work toward the clinic?
Yeah, as we all know, CNS is a complicated, it's been challenging, right? So I think it takes the broad ecosystem. I think you need scientific collaborators who understand disease biology. So like we've put together a science advisory board, and we continue to interact with these scientific collaborators on sub and outside. You need clinical experts who understand patient population and they understand the trial design. You need, manufacturing and CMC partners that can help you build, a scalable product that is delivered into the brain and acts at the intended target site. Regulatory experts who actually understand the regulatory pathway for gene therapy development or CNS-directed gene therapy. But you obviously need investors. You also could benefit from strategic partners who understand that transformative therapies require, disciplined development and hard work over time. And, I think early stage companies could always benefit from a good strategic partnership with a larger company. They've had the lessons, they learn from it, and they can help you. And so, for CNS gene therapy, which is a complex area, all of this has to be aligned. It has enormous potential, if the biology, the delivery, the patient selection and development, and either investors or strategic helps are aligned. And for us, getting a little bit towards the mission, the most valuable partners are really those who share the vision of precision medicine in neurodegeneration. We really believe in this approach, and who can help us translate, strong biology into development-ready therapeutic platform, and then into the therapy that can be accessed by patients.
That's great. JayaBio, Paul, has locations in South San Francisco and Chapel Hill, North Carolina. How do you think about building a company across life sciences ecosystems, particularly when talent, science, capital, and partners may sit in different markets?
Yeah, well, that's a modern world, right? You can be across different places, and I actually think that modern biotech companies can be built very effectively across ecosystems, as long as the companies are purposeful, how they access, talent, capital, science, or the infrastructure across these ecosystems. So, South San Francisco is no-brainer. It's one of the world's leading biotech hubs, deep access to investors and partners and experienced operators. Chapel Hill and broader Research Triangle region is also no-brainer. It offers exceptional academic and scientific and life sciences ecosystem, strong universities, strong talent pool, and really supportive and I think collegiate growing biotech community. So for us, this combination is very attractive. We remain connected to major capital and partnering markets, while we also building a very strong operational presence in a region where we think can support long-term company growth. So the way I think about it is that the geography is not the key alone. It's really building the right network around the company and these geographies.
Indeed. That's great. Paul, if JayaBio is successful, what could this mean more broadly for how the industry approaches genetically defined neurodegenerative disease?
Yes, it's another excellent question. What does it all mean at the end? And I think that if successful, JayaBio could help support a broader shift in how the industry thinks about neurodegeneration. Rather than treating Alzheimer's or Parkinson's as a single uniform diseases, we may increasingly define patient subgroups by genetic risk or molecular signatures or disease-driving pathways. And I hope that this would have implications beyond one company, one program. It could influence diagnostics, it could influence trial design, biomarker development, therapeutic targeting, and ultimately patient care. And hopefully more companies will take a look at precision medicine approach and neurodegeneration, not just Jaya alone. And so our hope is that we make a contribution to this future where neurodegenerative diseases are diagnosed and treated with much greater biological precision, matching the right therapy to the right patient at the right time. Kind of going back to my early career roots at Genzyme.
That's great, Paul. As we close for today, what final message would you leave with us as far as the people on this podcast who are often life sciences leaders, investors, collaborators in the industry? What they may be developing their own companies. What advice might you give them?
Well, my message, for today is relatively simple. It is that neurodegeneration needs a paradigm shift. And, we should be not afraid of looking or going where biology points us towards. Of course, we have to be disciplined about it, but we should not be afraid. So I think we need a paradigm shift. And I think we've made a progress as a field and a lot of effort in terms of investment and companies' hard work went into this field, but the unmet need remains really enormous. And I think that to make meaningful advances, we need to move beyond one-size-fits-all approach and really embrace biological precision, identifying the mechanism of action for patient subpopulations. And that's what we believe at JayaBio. We believe that genetically defined neurodegeneration represents actually important frontier in reframing Alzheimer's and reframing Parkinson's as a genetically defined neurodegenerative disease. And by understanding the underlying biology and targeting the upstream mechanism, we may be able to develop therapies that are more rational, more targeted, and ultimately much more impactful for patients and families.
Fantastic, Paul. Finally, how can listeners learn more about Jaya Biosciences or connect with you?
Well, listeners can learn more by visiting our website at jayabio.com and following Jaya Biosciences on LinkedIn. We're a little bit old school, so we're not on social every day, but we are easy to find. And I'm also on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to connect with people who share an interest in precision medicine, in neurodegeneration, and gene therapy, and most importantly, in improving lives of patients and families affected by these devastating diseases. So anybody is welcome to reach out, and we'll make sure we connect.
Thank you, Paul. That wraps up this episode of Executive Insights for Life Sciences Innovators. I appreciate you tuning in and hope you found today's conversation valuable. If you enjoyed the discussion, please be sure to leave a review and share it with your network. We'll be taking a brief summer break, but please mark your calendars for September the 11th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time with Justin Byers of Axio Biopharma. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, GeneCoda. It was a pleasure being here.